Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight we create a new Napa Valley tradition with the first ever live radio performance of Charles Dickens' classic, A Christmas Carol. Performed by Napa's own Dreamweavers Theater under the direction of Louise Anderson, tonight's performance is broadcast on KVON 1440 AM radio and Napa TV's cable channel 27. Dickens' Christmas Carol is brought to you by the many fine merchants and members of the Napa Downtown Association, who wish to thank you for supporting our local businesses all year long, and Napa's Charter Oaks Bank and President Brian Kelly, who wish all of you a very joyous holiday season. When you shop and bank, you have a choice. When you choose these local businesses, you support the people who give back to this community all year long. We begin tonight's program with the words of the author himself. I have endeavored in this ghostly little book to raise the ghost of an idea, which shall not put my readers out of humor with themselves, with each other, with the season, or with me. May it haunt their houses pleasantly, and no one wish to lay it down.
Marley was dead. Let there be no doubt about that. The register of his burial had been signed by the clergyman, the clerk, and the undertaker. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good for anything he chose to put it to. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. Now Scrooge and Marley were partners for I don't know how long. Scrooge was his only executor, his only friend, his only mourner. Scrooge had never painted out old Marley's name. There it still was, years afterwards, above the door of the warehouse. Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge. Sometimes they called him Marley. He answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, was Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, "My dear Scrooge, how are you?" No children asked him what the time it was. No one ever once in all his life inquired of Scrooge the way to such and such a place. Even the dogs seemed to know him and would tug their owners into doorways and up into courtyards so as not to meet him. But what did Scrooge care? It was just the thing he liked, to edge his solitary way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year upon a Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting-house. It was cold, bleak, biting, foggy weather, and though the clocks had only just struck 3, it was already quite dark. The door of Scrooge's office was open so that he could keep an eye upon his clerk, who, in a dismal little cell beyond, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so much smaller that it looked like one lump of coal. But he couldn't stoke it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own office, so the clerk put on his muffler and tried to warm himself at the candle, an effort in which, not being a man with a strong imagination, he failed. As he was turning back to his work, the door of the counting-house opened.
A Merry Christmas, Uncle. God save you.
Bah! Humbug!
Christmas a humbug, Uncle? Surely you don't mean that.
I do, nephew. Christmas. Why should you be merry? You're as poor a man as I know.
Don't be angry, Uncle.
What else can I be, when I must live in a world of fools? Merry Christmas? Away with Merry Christmas. What is Christmas time to you but a time for buying gifts with no money? A time for finding yourself a year older, but not an hour richer? Every idiot that goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips ought to be boiled with his own plum pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart.
Uncle!
Nephew, celebrate Christmas in your way, and let me celebrate it in mine.
Celebrate it, but you don't celebrate it.
Let me leave it alone, then. It has never done you any good.
There are many things I haven't profited from, I'm sure. Christmas is one of them. But I've always thought of Christmas as a good time, A kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time in the whole long year when men seem to join together and open their closed-up hearts freely. And so, though it has never put a penny in my pocket, I still believe it has done me good. And so I say, God bless it.
Quite a powerful speaker, nephew. I'm surprised you haven't run for Parliament.
Don't be angry, Uncle. Come have dinner with us tomorrow.
Have dinner with you? You'll see me in hell first.
But why?
Why did you marry?
Because I fell in love.
And with a girl even more penniless than yourself.
Glynis is a fine girl, if only you would meet her.
Good evening, nephew.
I'm sorry then, Uncle, but I'll keep my Christmas humour to the last. Merry Christmas, Uncle.
Good evening, I say.
And a Happy New Year.
Scrooge's nephew left without an angry word. The clerk, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let someone else in. He was a portly gentleman, pleasant to behold, and now stood with hat off in Scrooge's office. He had a book and papers in his hand, and bowed to him.
These are the offices of Scrooge and Marley, are they not? Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?
Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night.
Surely his generosity is well represented in his surviving partner, Mr. Scrooge?
What is it that you want?
At this festive time of year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more important than ever that we men of business make some provision for those less fortunate than ourselves.
Are there no prisons?
Plenty of prisons.
And the workhouses? Are they still in operation?
They are. I wish I could say they are not.
The treadmill and the poor law, are they in full vigor?
Both very busy.
I'm glad to hear it.
Since they hardly provide Christian cheer to the many, many poor of this city, we are trying to raise a fund to buy them some food, drink, and means of warmth. This is the time of year that the effects of poverty are most keenly felt, while we who are blessed rejoice in our abundance. What shall I put you down for?
Nothing.
You wish to remain anonymous, then?
I wish to remain undisturbed. I don't make merry at Christmas, and I cannot afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I mentioned, and they certainly cost enough. Those who are badly off must go there.
But many can't go there, and many would rather die.
If they would rather die, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Good evening.
Scrooge's clerk let out the gentleman, who, with one more look over his shoulder at Scrooge, now hunched once more over his work, pulled his collar up and strode into the fog. At length the hour of shutting up of counting-houses arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge, dismounting his stool, announced the fact to the expectant clerk, who instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat.
You want all day tomorrow off, I suppose?
If quite convenient, sir.
It is not convenient, and it is not fair. If I were to hold back half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, wouldn't you?
Yes, sir.
And yet you do not think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work.
It's only once a year, sir.
A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning.
The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white muffler dangling below his waist, for he had no greatcoat, went down an ice slide with some boys 20 times in honour of its being Christmas Eve, and then ran home as hard as he could. Before Scrooge could make his way even a block beyond his place of business, a small man in tattered breeches and a threadbare shirt and vest stepped out from an alleyway.
Mr. Scrooge, sir.
What do you want? Who are you?
Samuel Wilkins, sir.
Ah, yes. You owe me a goodly sum of money. Well, if you want to pay it, come back day after tomorrow. I don't do business in the teeth of inclement weather.
I can't pay it, sir.
I'm not surprised.
Not unless you give me some more time.
Did I ask you for more time when you asked me to lend you the money?
Oh, no, sir, but
Then why ask me for more time for you to pay it back?
I can't take me wife to a debtor's prison.
Then leave her behind. Why should your wife go to debtor's prison? She did not borrow the money, you did. What
But-
has your wife got to do with it anyway? For a matter of fact, what have I got to do with it? Good evening.
But, sir, it's Christmas.
Christmas has even less to do with it than your wife has or I have. You would still owe me the money, and we were in the middle of an August bank holiday. Get out of my way.
And leaving Samuel Wilkins slumped in despair behind him, Scrooge went on his way. He took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his dead partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms, for nobody lived there but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices. Up the stairs Scrooge went, not caring a button for its being very dark. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. Sitting room, bedroom, closet, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, a small fire in the grate, spoon and bowl ready, and the little saucepan of gruel upon the hob. Nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Quite satisfied, he closed the door and locked himself in, double-locked himself in, which was his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap, and sat down before the very low fire to take his gruel. As he threw his head back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell that hung in the room and communicated, for some purpose now long forgotten, with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment, and with a strange dread, that as he looked, he saw this bell begin to swing. Soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This was succeeded by a clanking noise, deep down below, as if some person was dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine cellar. Then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. It came on through the heavy door, and a spectre passed into the room before his eyes. It was Marley, in his pigtail, waistcoat, tights, and boots. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on the back of his coat. Although Scrooge looked the phantom through and through, and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes, and noticed the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about its head and chin, he was still incredulous.
What is this? What do you want?
Much.
Who are you?
Ask me who I was.
Who are you, then?
In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley.
Can you sit down?
I can.
Do it, then.
Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, but the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it.
You don't believe in me. Why do you doubt your senses?
Because any little thing can affect them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheat. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There is more gravy than grave about you, whatever you are. You see this toothpick I'm holding?
I do.
You do not look at it.
I see it just the same.
Well, I have only to swallow it, to be haunted by an army of goblins, all of my own creation. Humbug, I tell you!
Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart by any means jocular then. The truth is that he tried to be smart as a way of distracting his own attention and keeping down the horror he felt. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom took off the bandage round its head and let its lower jaw drop upon its chest.
Ah, dreadful apparition! Why do you trouble me?
Man of the world, do you believe in me or not?
I do. I must. But why do you walk the earth? And why do you come to me?
The spirit of every man must walk among its fellows, and if that spirit does not do so in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander throughout the world and watch what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth.
You are chained. Tell me why.
I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link, and by my own choice I wore it. Does it not seem familiar to you? The chain you wear was much longer than this one many years ago. It is a ponderous chain. I am here to warn you that you still have a chance to escape my fate, a chance that I have gotten for you. You will be visited by 3 ghosts.
If this is the chance you mentioned, I think I'd rather not.
Without their visits, you cannot hope to avoid the path I walk. Expect the first when the bell tolls 1, the second on the stroke of 2, and the third when the last stroke of 3 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and, for your own sake, remember what has passed between us.
Then the ghost stood and began to walk backward from Scrooge, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the apparition reached it, it was wide open. It rose up to the sill and stepped backward out the open window and into the air, where it dissolved like so much frost in the sun. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double-locked, as he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. Scrooge tried to say, "Humbug," but stopped at the first syllable. And, being, from the emotion he had undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the lateness of the hour, he went straight to bed without undressing, and fell asleep on the instant. When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that, looking out of bed, he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber, until suddenly the church clock struck the hour. Light flashed up in the room instantly, and the curtains of his bed were drawn aside by a strange figure, like a child, yet not so much like a child as like an old woman as seen from a great distance, and giving her the proportions of a child. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle on it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and, in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright clear jet of light, which by all of this was visible, and yet which was doubtless the occasion of its using a great extinguisher for a cap, which it now held under its arm. Perhaps Scrooge could not have told anybody why, if anybody could have asked him, but he had a special desire to see the spirit in its cap, and begged it to be covered.
What? Would you so soon put out with worldly hands the light I give? Is it not enough that you are one of those whose passions made this cap, and forced me through whole trains of years to wear it low upon my brow?
No, not at all, Spirit. I beg your pardon. But tell me, who or what are you?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
Long past?
Your past, Mr. Scrooge. Your welfare brings me here.
Well, then, if it concerns my own past, I dare say I have already seen it. And if you are concerned about my welfare, a good night's sleep would go far toward that end.
Take heed, Mr. Scrooge. I have much to show you. Do not let my benign appearance fool you. You shall see what I have come to show you, like it or not. Come with me now. My time with you is short, Mr. Scrooge. I must make way for other visitors.
Visitors! Visitors! I've already had too many visitors this night.
I am so sorry, Mr. Scrooge. I'm sure Mr. Marley is sorry as well. I believe it could be said that everyone who has ever known you is quite as sorry one way or another.
Apologies will do not make up for a ruined night's sleep.
Tut, tut, Mr. Scrooge.
Very well. I shall comply, but only with the greatest reluctance.
Duly noted, Mr. Scrooge. But tell me, is your reluctance to accept my help because you feel it unnecessary or no use?
Neither. It is because it is a bother.
At that, the spirit took Scrooge's arm and moved towards a window, closed though it was. It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes, that the bed was warm and that the thermometer was well below freezing, that he was clad but lightly in his slippers, dressing-gown and nightcap, and that he had a cold at the time. The grasp, though gentle as a child's, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, clasped its dress in fear.
I am mortal. I am liable to fall.
Bear but a touch of my hand here upon your heart, and you shall be upheld in more than this.
As the words were spoken, they passed through the window and stood in a long, bare, melancholy room, made barer still by lines of plain deal forms and desks. At one of these, a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire.
Good heavens! I know this place. I was a boy here. But where are all the other boys?
They have all gone home for the holidays. All but this one.
Yes. Of course. Christmas after Christmas, I was left behind with nothing but my books and my dreams for company.
Scrooge's younger self rose and began to walk up and down despairingly, and with a mournful shaking of his head glanced anxiously towards the door of the classroom. To his surprise, it opened, and a little girl, much younger than the boy, came darting in, and putting her arms about his neck and often kissing him, addressed him as her dear, dear brother.
Fan, dear little Fan.
Hush! These are but shadows of things that have been. They cannot see or hear you.
The child, clapping her tiny hands, excitedly told her brother that she had come to take him home, and not just for Christmas, but for good and all. She clapped her hands again, and laughed at her brother's incredulity. She tried to pat his head, but being too little, laughed again, and stood up on tiptoe to embrace him instead. Then she began to drag him, in her childish eagerness, toward the door, and he, nothing loath to go, accompanied her.
Always a delicate creature, whom a breath might have withered. But she had a large heart. She died a woman, and had, as I think, children.
One child.
Yes, of course. Your nephew.
Before Scrooge could comment, he felt the grasp of the spirit's hand tighten upon his arm. They passed through the wall, and suddenly stood in the busy thoroughfares of a city. It was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here, too, it was Christmas time. The ghost beckoned Scrooge to follow her through the door of a certain warehouse, and asked Scrooge if he knew it.
Know it? I was apprenticed here.
They went in. At the sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting behind such a high desk that if he'd been 2 inches taller he would have knocked his head against the ceiling, Scrooge cried out in amazement.
It's old Fezziwig! Bless him! It's Fezziwig alive again!
Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands together in glee, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself, from his shoes to his head, and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice,
Ebenezer! Ebenezer Scrooge!
At which admonishment a living and moving picture of Scrooge's former self, now a young man, came briskly in.
Right here, sir.
By the stars, young man, where were you hiding?
Not hiding, sir. I was...
No matter. No more work tonight. We're closing up. It's Christmas Eve, Ebenezer.
And so Fezziwig admonished the young man that he should therefore have the shutters put up before a man can say Jack Robinson. Furthermore, that he and Dick and Archie should clear away and see that there would be lots of room there. Clear away? There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away or couldn't have cleared away with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off as if it were dismissed from public life for evermore. The floor was swept and watered, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouses was as snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as you would desire to see on a winter's eve.
Ebenezer, one more thing. Fetch my fiddle.
Yes, sir. Right away, sir.
Wait!
Sir?
My coat, Ebenezer.
Yes, sir. I'm on my way.
No more had Ebenezer dashed into the hallway than through another door swept Mrs. Fezziwig, round and rosy-cheeked from the cold and burdened with baskets and bowls.
What's this, Fezziwig? Where is your coat?
Ebenezer is finding it for me, my dear.
I'm happy to hear it. Here, take this punch bowl. I'll want it in the boat room. Is one of the cutting tables cleared?
If not, I'll have the girls see to it.
And just in time, here came Ebenezer, juggling Fezziwig's coat and fiddle, not knowing which should come in first prize in the race to his master's open arms.
Ah, Ebenezer, my coat and fiddle. Good, good. Now, take this bowl.
Never mind. I'll take it. I see they've cleared the table. Just see that he is properly dressed, will you, Ebenezer?
Yes, ma'am.
I shall have to take the time to tune it, I suppose.
Yes, sir.
Here, Ebenezer. What troubles you?
I was just thinking, sir, that one of us fellows must sit out some of the dances for want of a partner.
Yes, I see. I suppose you will have to be content with the roast, the cakes, and the punch. Or perhaps not.
Good evening, Mr. Fezziwig, Ebenezer.
And a Merry Christmas to you, Belle. I shall take my leave of you too now. Much to do, much to do.
Belle, how beautiful you look.
Thank you, Ebenezer. I was so pleased when Mrs. Fezziwig asked me to join the Christmas Eve celebration.
She must have known it would be no celebration for me without you. It's wonderful that you are here. Come, they'll be starting the dancing soon. No, wait. I meant to visit you with a gift, but now I can give it to you here.
Oh, Ebenezer!
It's only a shilling ring, Belle, but someday it will be a gold one.
Oh, it's a beautiful ring, Ebenezer. But I can't accept it.
It's not good enough for you?
No, it's not that.
Then is it because I'm not rich enough for you?
Don't be foolish. Of course it's not that. It's just that you are still young and may have a change of heart.
If I should ever have a change of heart toward you, it would only be because my heart had stopped beating.
And it makes no difference that I am poor.
I love you because you are not a vain, snobbish, rich girl.
But will you always feel that way?
As long as I live. Longer. Forever.
Then I accept your ring.
Come, dance with me then.
In came a fiddler and went up to the lofty desk and made an orchestra of it, and his tuning sounded like 50 stomach aches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast substantial smile. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 6 young followers whose hearts they broke. In came all the men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin, the baker. In came the cook with her brother's friend, the milkman. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow. Away they all went, 20 couples at once, hands half round and back again the other way, down the middle and up again, round and round in various stages of grouping. Old top couple always turning up in the wrong place, new top couple starting off again as soon as they got there, all top couples at last, and not a bottom one to help them. When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done!" And the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter, especially provided for that purpose. There were more dancers, and there was cake, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies and plenty of beer. When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everybody had retired but the two apprentices, they did the same to them, and thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under the counter in the back shop.
A small matter to make these silly folks so full of gratitude. He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?
It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add or count them up. The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune.
I see. Mr. Scrooge, did you not soon leave Fezziwig's employ for a higher-paying position at a more progressive firm?
Yes. It was there that I met Jacob Marley. The owner there really had no head for the business. Jacob and I soon owned it.
And was not Mr. Fezziwig forced to sell out himself to another business soon after?
Yes, mine.
I'm sorry, Mr. Scrooge. Did you speak?
You heard me. I said mine. I bought Fezziwig out.
And your promise to Belle that you would love her for how long?
Forever.
Forever came quickly to you, Mr. Scrooge. It was not long before money had replaced Belle in your heart.
Why is it that though the world despises poverty, yet it condemns the pursuit of wealth?
You fear the reproach of the world too much, Mr. Scrooge. Belle watched as your dreams fell away one by one, until only the master passion, gain, interested you.
If I grew less idealistic, what then? I had not changed toward Belle.
Your contract with Belle was made when you were both poor, and content to be so until your fortune should change through honest and diligent work. When it was made, you were a different man.
I was a boy.
Would you later have chosen a poor girl? You who would weigh everything by material value? Belle released you with a full heart, for the love of him who you once were, hoping sincerely that you would be happy in this life you had chosen. Have you chosen, Mr. Scrooge?
Spirit, remove me from this place.
I told you these were shadows of the things that have been, that they are what they are. Do not blame me.
Remove me. I cannot bear it. Leave me. Take me back. Haunt me no longer.
As he struggled with the spirit, he was conscious of being exhausted, and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further of being in his own bedroom. He had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep.
We pause in tonight's performance to thank Jeff Sheckman, General Manager for KVON, KVYN Radio, for generously allowing us to bring this performance to you for this holiday season. We also thank Napa's own community access television station, Napa TV channels 27 and 28, for producing and simulcasting this program. Finally, we thank the wonderful merchants and members of the Napa Downtown Association for their generous sponsorship of tonight's performance. You build a stronger community when you buy local. We also thank Napa's Charter Oak Bank and President Brian Kelly for sponsoring this presentation. Dreamweavers Theater Company is Napa's only nonprofit community theater. For 20 years, this diverse group of volunteer directors, actors, technicians, and lobby staff have brought the residents and visitors of the Napa Valley quality live theatrical performances that are affordable and accessible by all. For more information about Dreamweavers Theater, call 255-LIVE. That's 255-5483, or visit them on the internet at dreamweaverstheater.org. If you would like to see these actors on stage for a live costume reading of Christmas Carol at the theater, call 255-LIVE for reservations. The live stage performances will be on Friday, December the 22nd at 7:30 and Saturday, December the 23rd at 3 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. Dreamweaver's next regularly scheduled stage production is the very funny Neil Simon play, Prisoner of 2nd Avenue, which will run from January 12th through January the 28th at the River Park Center Theater. Tonight's live performance will be rebroadcast on December 21st from 4 to 6 p.m. And now back to our story.
Scrooge awoke in his own bedroom. There was no doubt about that. But it and his own adjoining sitting room, into which he shuffled in his slippers, attracted by a great light there, had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove. The leaves of holly, ivy, and mistletoe reflected back the light, as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that wreck of hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or Marley's, or for many and many a winter season gone. Heaped upon the floor, to form a kind of throne, were turkeys, geese, game, brawn, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12th cakes, and great bowls of punch. In an easy state upon this couch there sat a giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch, in shape not unlike a horn of plenty, and who raised it high to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door.
Come in and know me better, man. I am the ghost of Christmas Present. Look upon me. You have never seen the like of me before.
Never.
Have never walked forth with the younger members of my family, meaning, for I am very young, my elder brothers born in these later years?
I don't think I have. I'm afraid I have not. Have you had many brothers?
More than 1,800.
Ah, a tremendous family to provide for. Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth before on compulsion, and I learnt a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have something to teach me, let me profit by it.
Touch my robe.
Scrooge did as he was told and held it fast. The room and its contents all vanished instantly, and they stood in the city streets upon a snowy Christmas morn. Scrooge and the ghost passed on, invisible, straight to Scrooge's clerk's house, and on the threshold of the poor door the spirit smiled and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinklings of his torch. Think of that! Bob but had 15 bob to him a week to himself. He pocketed upon Saturdays but 15 copies of his Christian name, and yet the ghost of Christmas Present blessed his 4-room house. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show for 6pence, and she laid the cloth, assisted while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes, and getting the corners of his monstrous shirt collar, Bob's private property, compared upon his son and heir in honour of the day, into his mouth, rejoiced to find himself so gallantly attired, and yearned to show his linen in the fashionable lanes. And he, not proud although his collar nearly choked him, blew on the fire until the slow potatoes, bubbling up, knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled.
What has ever got your precious father then, and your brother Tiny Tim? And Martha wasn't as late last Christmas Day by half an hour.
Here's Martha, Mother.
Why, bless your heart, my dear, how late you are.
Oh, we did a deal of work to finish up last night and had to clear away this morning.
Well, never mind, so long as you are come. Sit you down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm Lord bless you.
No, there's father coming. Ride, Martha, ride.
So Martha hid herself, and in came Bob the father, with at least 3 feet of muffler, exclusive of fringe, hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned and brushed up to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Also for Tiny Tim he bore a little crutch, and had his limbs supported by an iron frame.
Why, where's our Martha?
Not coming.
Not coming? Not coming on Christmas Day?
Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, if it were only in joke, so she came out prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms, while Peter and Martha hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off to the wash-house, that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper.
And how did little Tim behave?
As good as gold, and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful, sitting by himself so much, and thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me coming home that he hoped the people saw him in the church, because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant for them to remember, upon Christmas Day, who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. He's growing stronger every day, isn't he, my love?
Yes, dear, surely.
Tim's active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool beside the fire. And while Bob, turning up his cuffs, as if, poor fellow, they were capable of being made more shabby, compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons, and stirred it round and round, and put it on the hob to simmer, Master Peter went to fetch the goose, with which he soon returned. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy, ready beforehand in a little saucepan, hissing hot. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigour. Martha dusted the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a little corner at the table. At last the dishes were set on and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it into the breast. But when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all round the board, and even Tiny Tim beat on the table with the handle of his knife, and cried feebly, "Hurrah!" There was never such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there was ever such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavour, size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by apple sauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone upon the dish, they hadn't ate it all at last. Yet every one had had enough, and was steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows. But now, the plates being changed by Martha, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witness to take the pudding up and bring it in. Suppose it should not be done enough? Suppose it should break in turning it out? Suppose somebody should have got over the wall to the backyard and stolen it while they were merry with the goose? All sorts of horrors were proposed. Hello! A great deal of steam. The pudding was out of the copper. A smell like washing day. That was a cloth. A smell like an eating-house, and a pastry-cook's next door to each other, with a laundress's next door to that. That was the pudding. In half a minute Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly, with a pudding like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in half a quartern of ignited brandy, and bedight with Christmas holly stuck into the top. Oh, a wonderful pudding, Bob Cratchit said, and calmly too, that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Mrs. Cratchit said that now the weight was off her mind, she would confess that she had had her doubts about the quality of the flour. Everybody had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought it was at all a small pudding for a large family. Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. At last the dinner was all done, the cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. The compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect, apples and oranges were put upon the table, and a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth in what Bob Cratchit called a circle, and at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as golden goblets would have done, and Bob served it out with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire spluttered and crackled noisily.
A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us.
God bless us.
And Tiny Tim, holding his small cup tightly with both of his withered hands, raised it and said, God bless us, everyone. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob closed his arm around Tim's shoulders and held him close, as he so loved the child and wished to keep him by his side and dreaded that he might be taken from him.
I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast.
The founder of the feast, indeed. I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I'd hope he'd have a good appetite for it.
My dear, it's Christmas Day.
I'll drink his health for your sake, and the day's, not for his. Long life to him, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt.
The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings which had no heartiness in it. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care twopence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for full 5 minutes. After it had passed away, they were 10 times merrier than before from the mere relief of Scrooge the Baleful being done with. Bob Cratchit told them how he had a situation in his eye for Master Peter, which would bring him, if obtained, full 5 and 6pence weekly. Peter himself looked thoughtfully at the fire between his collars, as if he were deliberating what particular investments he should favour when he came into the receipt of that bewildering income. Martha, who was a poor apprentice at a milliner's, then told them what kind of work she had to do, and how many hours she worked at a stretch, and how she meant to lie abed tomorrow morning for a good long rest, tomorrow being a holiday she passed at home. Also, how she had seen a countess and a lord some days before, and how the lord was no taller than Peter, at which Peter pulled up his collars so high that you couldn't have seen his head if you had been there. All this time the chestnuts and the jug went round, and by they had a song about a lost child travelling in the snow, from Tiny Tim, who had a plaintive little voice, and sang it very well indeed. There was nothing of high mark in this. They were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time, and when they faded, and looked happier yet in the sprinklings of the spirit's torch at parting, Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim, until the last. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, as this scene vanished, to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognise it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright gleaming room, with the spirit standing smiling by his side, and looking at that same nephew. It is a fair, even-handed, noble adjustment of things, that while there is infection and disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humour. When Scrooge's nephew laughed, Scrooge's niece by marriage laughed as heartily as he, and their assembled friends, being not a bit behindhand, laughed out lustily.
He said that Christmas was a humbug. As I live, he believed it too.
No more shame for him, Fred.
He's a comical old fellow, that's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offences carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself, always. Here he takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't come and dine with us. What's the consequences? He doesn't lose much of a dinner.
Indeed, I think he loses a very good dinner.
Yes, Fred, a very good dinner.
You are so right, Glynis, dear.
Very good indeed.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, because I haven't any great faith in these young housekeepers.
After a while they played at forfeits, for it's good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas, when it was that the mighty founder was a child himself. It was after the last round of this that the spirit offered its robe again to Scrooge.
Wait, here's a new game. A half-hour spirit, only one.
Come, Fred, you said you would start.
Right, I have it.
Is it a thing?
No.
An animal, then?
Yes.
A cow?
Oh, never so docile, no.
It's wild and savage, then.
Yes.
Does the creature howl?
Sorry, no.
Growl?
Indeed, yes.
And can it be found here in London?
Yes.
In a menagerie?
No, uncaged.
Walking the streets, Fred?
Yes, my bride, these very streets.
A cat.
A tiger?
A bear?
A weasel.
A badger.
A Tasmanian devil?
No, and no.
Give us a hint then, Fred.
Very well. It talks sometimes.
A savage animal that walks the streets of London, growls and talks sometimes. But whatever could
I have it! It's your Uncle Scrooge!
He has certainly given us plenty of merriment, has he not? It would be ungrateful not to drink to his health. Raise your cups to Uncle Scrooge. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, wherever he may be this day. Uncle Scrooge!
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Come, everyone, to the groaning board.
Come, Scrooge. My life upon this globe is brief. It ends at midnight. Christmas night.
Oh, so short a time. Forgive me, but I see something strange that I do not think belongs to your person, protruding from the vicinity of the back of your robe. Is it a hand or a claw I see?
It might be either, for the small amount of flesh there is upon it. Look here. Look upon these two children.
From the foldings of its robe the ghost brought two children, a boy and a girl, wretched, abject, frightful, miserable. They knelt at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment.
Spirit, are they yours?
They are mankind's, and they cling to me, asking for comfort from their fathers. One is ignorance, the other want. Beware them both.
But have they no refuge? No resource?
Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?
What? No, Spirit, no!
Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?
Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it no more. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the air through which the spirit seemed to move, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible, save one outstretched hand. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved.
Am I in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come? Ghost of the future, I fear you more than any spectre I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live, to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear your company and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me? Lead on, lead on. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, Spirit.
They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for rather the city seemed to spring up about them. But there they were in the heart of it, at the merchants' exchange amongst the merchants. The spirit stopped beside a knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk.
No, I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead.
When did he die?
Last night, I believe.
Why, what was the matter with him? I thought he'd never die.
God knows.
Oh, what's he done with his money?
I haven't heard. Left it to his company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me. That's all I know. It's likely to be a very cheap funeral, and upon my life, I don't know anyone of business who will go to it. Should we volunteer, James?
I don't mind going if I am given lunch, but I must be fed if I go.
Well, I never eat lunch, but I'll go if anybody else will. I really believe I may have been his best friend. Why, we spoke any time we passed each other.
Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit should attach importance to conversation apparently so trivial, but feeling assured that it must have some hidden purpose, he set himself to consider what it was likely to be. It could scarcely be supposed to have any bearing on the death of Jacob, his old partner, for that was past, and this ghost province was the future. He looked about in that very place for his own image, but another man stood in his accustomed corner, and though the clock pointed to his usual time of day for being there, he saw no likeness of himself amongst the multitudes that poured in through the porch. It gave him little surprise, however, for he had been revolving in his mind a change of life, and thought and hoped he saw his new-born resolutions carried out in this. They left this busy scene, and went into an obscure part of town, to a low shop where iron, old rags, bottles and bones, and greasy offal were bought. Sitting in among the wares he dealt in, by a charcoal stove made of old bricks, was a grey-haired rascal, who sat smoking his pipe in all the luxury of calm retirement. Scrooge and the Phantom came into the presence of this man, just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too. She was followed by a man in faded black, who was no less startled by the sight of them than they had been upon recognition of each other. After a short period of blank astonishment, in which the old man with the pipe had joined them, they all burst into a laugh.
Let the charwoman alone to be the first. Let the laundress alone to be the second, and let the undertaker's man alone to be the third. Look here, old Joe, here's a chance. If we haven't all three met here without meaning it...
You couldn't have met me in a better place, Mrs. Cobb. Come into the parlour. You were made free of it long ago, you know. And the other two ain't strangers. Stop till I shut the door as shop. Ah, how it shrieks. There ain't such a rusty bit of metal in their places its own hinges, I believe. And I'm sure there's no such old bones here as mine. We're all suitable to our calling. We're well matched. Come into the parlour. Come into the parlour.
The first woman threw her bundle on the floor and sat down in a flaunting manner on a stool, crossing her elbows on her knees and looking with a bold defiance at the other two.
What odds, then? What odds, Mrs. Dilber? Every person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did.
That's true indeed, no man more so.
Why, then, don't stand there staring as if you was afraid, woman. Who's the wiser? We're not going to pick holes in each other's coats, I don't suppose.
No, indeed, we should hope not.
Very well, then. That's enough. Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose.
No, indeed.
If he wanted to keep him after he was dead, a wicked old screw, why wasn't it natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have had somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying gasping out his last there, alone by himself.
It's the truest words that ever was spoke. It's a judgment on him.
Oh, I wish it was a little heavier judgment, and it should have been, you may depend upon it, if I could have laid my hands on anything else. Open that bundle, old Joe, and let me know the value of it. Speak out plain. I'm not afraid to be the first, nor afraid for them to see it. We knew pretty well that we were helping ourselves before we met here, I believe. It's no sin. Open the bundle, Joe.
No, allow me the pleasure.
Well, thank you, Mr. Minch. Very much indeed.
Now, 2 seals, a pair of sleeve buttons, a brooch.
Why, those could almost be my own.
Here you are, Mr. Minch. And I wear rubbery it is too.
This is all?
more than they are worth.
But the seals are gold.
That's your account, Mr. Minchin. I wouldn't give you another sixpence if I was to be boiled in oil for not doing it. Who's next? Mrs. Cobb?
Joe took her bundle and drew out its contents. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, a few pairs of boots. Her account was tallied and the coin handed over. Joe raised his hands to stop her speaking the disappointment writ plainly on her face.
I always give too much to the ladies. It's a weakness of mine, and that's the way I ruin myself. That's your account. If you asked me for another penny, I'd repent of being so liberal and knock off 1/2 crown.
And now undo my bundle, Joe.
Joe went down on his knees for the great convenience of opening it, and after having unfastened a great many knots, dragged out a large heavy roll of some dark stuff.
And what do you call this? Not bed curtains?
Bed curtains?
You don't mean to say you took their rings and all with him lying there?
Yes, I do. Why not? Don't drop that oil on them blankets now.
Is blankets?
Who else's blankets do you think? He isn't likely to take cold without 'em, I dare say.
I hope he didn't die of anything catching.
Don't you be afraid of that. I ain't so fond of his company that I'd loiter about him for such things if he did. And you may look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole in it. It's the best he had, and a fine one too. They'd have wasted it if it hadn't been for me.
What do you call wasting of it?
Well, Joe, we would have buried it in it, of course.
A low chuckle rumbled from the throat of the undertaker's man, which was soon followed by the shrieks and cackles of the other 3 as they sat grouped about their spoils in the dim light of old Joe's lamp. Scrooge looked upon them with detestation and disgust, which could hardly have been greater, though they had been demons marketing the corpse itself.
Spirit, I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heavens, what is this?
The scene had changed, and now he almost touched the bare, uncurtained bed. A pale light, rising in the outer air, fell straight upon this bed, and on it, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this plundered, unknown man.
Spirit, let me see some tenderness connected with this death, or is this dark chamber spirit'll be ever present to me?
The ghost conducted him to poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and children seated round the fire. Quiet. Very quiet. Peter sat in a corner with a book before him. The mother and her daughter were engaged in needlework, but surely they were very quiet.
And he took a child, and set him in the midst of them.
Where had Scrooge heard those words? He had not dreamed them. The boy must have read them out, as he and the spirit crossed the threshold. Why did he not go on? The mother laid her work upon the table, and put her hand to her face.
The colour hurts my eyes. It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home for the world. It must be near his time.
Past it, rather. But I think he has walked a little slower than he used to these last few evenings, Mother.
I have known him to walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed.
And so have I.
And I, often.
But he was very light to carry, and his father loved him so that it was no trouble. And here is your father at the door.
She hurried out to meet him, and Bob, in his muffler, he had no need of it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried to see who should help him to it most. Bob was very cheerful with them, and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table, and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and Martha. They would be done long before Sunday, he said.
Sunday? You went today then, Robert?
Yes, my dear. I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. But you'll see it often. I promised him I would walk there on a Sunday. My little child. My little child.
He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, He and his child would have been further apart, perhaps, than they were.
Spectre, something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I don't know how. Tell me what this man that was with the covered face, whom we saw lying dead.
The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him to a dismal, wretched, ruinous churchyard. The spirit stood amongst the graves and pointed down to one.
Before I draw near to that stone which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of things that will be, or are they the shadows of things that only might be?
Still the ghost pointed down the grave by which it stood.
The things men do in their lives lead to certain ends, and if they do not change what they do, these ends must become a reality. But if they change what they do, the ends will change. Say that this is true of what you are about to show me.
The spirit was as immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and, following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge.
Am I that man who lay upon the bed? No, spirit, oh no, no, spirit, hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man that must have been without your help. Why show me this if I am past all hope? Assure me that I am yet have a change of these shadows you have shown me by changing my life.
For the first time, the hand faltered.
I will honor Christmas in my heart. I will try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me that I may sponge away the writings on that stone.
Holding up his hands in one last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, to make amends in. He was checked in his transport by the churches ringing out the lustiest peals he had ever heard. Running down to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, no night. Clear, bright, stirring, golden day.
You there, boy! What's today, my fine fellow?
Today is Christmas Day.
It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. Oh, my fine fellow, do you know the poulterers, the one in the next street but one at the corner?
I should hope I did.
Oh, an intelligent boy, a remarkable boy. Oh, do you know whether they have sold the prize turkey that was hanging, not the little prize turkey, the big one?
What? The one as big as me?
Oh, what a delightful boy. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck.
It's hanging there now.
It is? Go and buy it.
What? Oh, popped your cork, haven't you?
No, I'm in earnest. Go and buy it and tell them to bring it here, that I may tell them where to take it. Come back with the man, and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes, and I'll give you half a crown. Oh, there he goes, off like a shot. Oh, I'll send the turkey to Bob Cratchit. He won't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim.
The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did somehow, and went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. And it was such a turkey! He could never have stood upon his legs, that bird. He would have snapped them off in a minute like sticks of sealing wax. Scrooge dressed himself in all his best, and at last got out into the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present, and walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded everyone with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant that 3 or 4 good-humoured fellows said, "Good morning, sir, a Merry Christmas to you." And Scrooge said often afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he had ever heard, those were the blithest in his ears. In the afternoon he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock, but he made a dash and did it. A very nice girl let him in upon his assurance that her master and mistress knew him. He paused with his hand on the dining-room door-latch, took in a great deep breath, and entered.
Fred?
Why, bless my soul, who's that?
Your Uncle Scrooge. I've come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?
Let him in? It's a mercy Fred did not shake his arm off. He was made to feel at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same as when Scrooge had seen her with the spirit. It was a wonderful party, with wonderful games and wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office next morning. Oh, he was early there. If only he could be the first, and catch Bob Cratchit coming in late. That was the thing he had set his heart upon. And he did it. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1:15. No Bob. Bob was a full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him come in. Bob's hat was off before he opened the door, his muffler too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen, as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. Scrooge hailed him in his accustomed voice, or as near as he could feign it.
What do you mean by coming here at this late time of day?
I am very sorry, sir. I am behind my time.
Yes, I think you are. Step this way, if you please.
It's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir.
Now, I'll tell you what, my friend. I am going to stand for this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, I am about to raise your salary.
Bob opened his mouth as if to plead for mercy in the matter, then shut it with a snap, stepping back to peer at Scrooge with no more surprise than if he'd stood before him suddenly in his nightshirt. Scrooge began to chortle, then laugh, then explode with mirth in a guffaw that threatened to bring the rafters of the old office down about their heads.
Oh, Merry Christmas, Bob! A merrier Christmas, my good fellow, than I have ever given you. I'll raise your salary and assist your struggling family, and we'll discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a bowl of Christmas punch. Now, make up the fires and buy a second coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit.
Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and more, and to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the old city ever knew. Some people laughed to see the change in him, but his own heart laughed too, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further contact with the spirits, but lived with what they taught him ever afterwards, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive did. May that truly be said of us and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone.
God bless us, everyone.
The preceding program was recorded live at the KVON studios in Napa, California, and simulcast on KVON 1440 AM radio and Napa TV cable channel 27. This Dreamweavers Theater production of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens was directed by Louise Anderson. The role of the narrator was played by Edwin Richards. Scrooge was played by George Corner. Nolan Kenmont Barney played Fred, young Ebenezer, and Peter. Kevin Barney was Fitzhugh, Fezziwig, and the Ghost of Christmas Present. Bob Cratchit, Topper, and Mr. Tarkington were played by Matthew Gracie. The roles of Samuel Wilkins, Mr. James, and Mr. Minch were played by Graham Bruce. Joe Lewis played the roles of Marley's Ghost and Old Joe. Ann Cummings was the ghost of Christmas Pass and Bess. Joanna Bourne played Mrs. Fezziwig, Claire, and Mrs. Cobb. The roles of Belle, Glynis, Martha, and Boy were played by Taylor Bartolucci. And Rose Sweeney was Mrs. Cratchit and Mrs. Dilber. Sound design for tonight's performance was by June Elaine Rife. Sponsors for tonight were the Napa Downtown Association, Napa Charter Oaks Bank. Without their generous support, we could not have brought you this special presentation of Dickens' Christmas Carol. When you shop and bank with the people who give back to this community, you build a stronger community. On behalf of KVON Radio, Napa TV, Dreamweavers Theater, and our cast and crew, we wish you a joyous holiday season and a prosperous new year. Good night.
Good night.